capital. At least 9 people were killed in the assault on Kyiv, and more than 70 were injured. Ukraine says more than 70 missiles and 150 drones targeted several cities, but Kyiv was hit the hardest. The attack puts the peace process in peril as tensions rise among both sides. Meanwhile, U.S. has threatened to walk away from efforts to get a ceasefire agreement. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky wants more pressure put on Russia. He's in South Africa seeking that country's help in efforts to end the war. Zelensky cut his trip short after getting word of that deadly Kyiv strikes, and he said a ceasefire must be the first step before he agrees to any concessions with Russia. And Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, he is meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte at the Pentagon. The war in Ukraine is expected to be high on their agenda. So let's bring in CBS News senior White House correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Ed, it's good to see you today. We know Trump posted about the situation in Ukraine earlier today. What was his message to Russian President Vladimir Putin?
It was simply, Vladimir, stop. In response to this attack in Kyiv, saying that 5,000 soldiers are dying on a regular basis, it's time to end this. And what's notable about it, Mugo, is yesterday the target of his ire was Ukrainian President Zelensky. Today, it's the Russian president. He's been frustrated with all sides on this, trying to get an agreement put together, having sent senior aides of his to that part of the world to try to get something done. Steve Witkoff, his lead envoy for these sensitive matters, expected to be in Russia in the coming days, but sending that signal through his own social media platform, one that's closely monitored by the world, to say, stop Putin and let's get this deal done. It signals that he's frustrated with both sides, clearly trying to put pressure on them, realizing that if this kind of violence continues, there's no hope for a deal.
Right. And we know that in about an hour, President Trump is set to host Norway's prime minister at the White House. Do we know what's on the agenda today?
Well, Ukraine will be to some extent, for sure. I mean, it's a far more urgent concern for countries in Europe, especially Norway, which sits there so close to Russia and the conflict in Ukraine. And so that's on the agenda. Undoubtedly, as it has been with every world leader who's been in touch with him in recent weeks, it'll be about tariffs as well, because it is a big concern, of course, to those countries that are in Europe or in the European Union. And so we'll expect much of this conversation to focus again on the situation there in Ukraine, and then, of course, tariffs.
All right, Ed, we are taking a live look at the big board right now. The Dow is up more than 200 points, but we know there's still some uncertainty on Wall Street about this entire trade war. The question here is, President Trump says trade talks with China, they're active, but China says that's not exactly true. So any clarification on how the White House is handling all of this?
Well, the president claimed yesterday when he was asked about this that the U.S. is in touch with China on a daily basis regarding trade. Overnight, Chinese officials signaled that's not the case, and that the way to get this sorted out is to drop the tariffs on China. The administration has said in the last 36 hours or so that it's not doing that unless China also seeks to rebalance global trade and back off its export focus that props up the Chinese economy. So, in essence, there's really been no change. What changed a bit, and what seems to be encouraging to Wall Street, is the shift in tone from the president. Not as aggressive, not as sort of saber-rattling, but instead signaling that, hey, over the next few weeks, as we talk to roughly 90 countries around the world, we may see some shifting and some lowering of tariffs. And if not, he's going to set new prices on them, which could just trigger this all again once more. Part of what's going on here with the markets, while the numbers are up, we keep seeing quarterly earnings reports from big corporations saying that they've got to pull back what they call their yearly estimates, or their sort of anticipated roadmap for the next year, because of the uncertainty created by this tariff war. So yet again this morning with Southwest Airlines, among others, saying, got to pull it back. That may have to do with some other company issues, but it is in part and primarily led by leaders of that company, said, the economic uncertainty that's being created by this trade war. So the White House hears that kind of stuff, and that's part of why you're seeing this shift in tone from the president. Right.
Certainly seems like this whole tariff conversation is never ending. So let's stay on that, Ed. We know several states, they're now suing to block Trump's tariffs. What can you tell us about that? Can you break down what they're asking for here?
These are Democratic-controlled states, Mugo, so no surprise that they're banding together to do this. Among them is Arizona, where the Attorney General, a Democrat, called these tariffs illegal because the states argue it's only Congress that can set tariffs on other countries. The law that the president's using to justify his work is one that allows him to implement tariffs on an emergency basis. Well, these 12 states, you see them there, stretching from Oregon all the way to Maine, all of them under the leadership of Democratic governors. They argue that there is no such emergency that the president is citing to merit the tariffs that are now in place. These 12 states are suing. This morning, the governor of Massachusetts said she might want to sign on to this as well. The governor of California, Gavin Newsom, has already sued separately. And again, the argument is you did this for no legal reason other than your interpretation of the situation, which they believe is not an emergency.